So today let's take a look at an interesting pair of powered desktop speakers in the Monolith MTM-100. So as you can see, these have dual 4-inch woofers, a 1.25-inch tweeter, and on each side you have 5.25-inch passive radiators. It also has this nice matte finish, which I like, and it's also not perfectly square. You can see here that there's a rounded shape to it. So lots of different things going on here. It is a fingerprint magnet, as you can tell there. And as far as specs, they are 50 watts a speaker. They claim a flat frequency response. We'll have to see about that. And Bluetooth 5 with aptX HD. It has Toslink optical input in case you need that. It also has a USB-C input so you can connect it directly to your computer. It has both RCA and 3.5mm inputs, a subwoofer output, and a front headphone jack, and also a remote. So the question is it worth its $449 asking price? Let's find out. It's Joe and Tell time. Monolith is a channel sponsor that allows me to make more videos for you guys. I'm allowed to say whatever I want about these speakers, and so that's what I'm going to do. So a few quick notes. I did try out the headphone jack on this, and it does work. It's not the best sounding output. It feels like it's kind of lacking in output. I find I get better sound if I just connect directly to the M1 MacBook Pro, but that is known to have a pretty good amplifier and headphone DAC. When you connect the subwoofer to this, it does apply a low pass filter to the sub, but it does not apply a high pass to this, which does not allow this to play any louder than it normally does. So I'm really interested in seeing how the raw measurements are of the passive speaker. So let's see how that goes. So you can see right here that the measurement is really rough, with the treble being very boosted right here. And so that is interesting, because I've always wanted to see a speaker that needed a lot of correction, but a lot of times what I'm hoping is going to happen is that they've designed a speaker specifically for correction. So you can already tell that the one in purple, the active one, looks much better than the response of the passive version. So there it is right there. So this is the remote. You can see that it has treble and bass controls, as well as this tone defeat. So let's see what those do. Right, so initial assessment of the MTM-100 just based on the measurements alone. Obviously the active one does a lot with the DSP to smooth out the response. Still not a perfect response. It looks like a dip in the crossover region, like scooped out mid-range section, so it's always V-shaped. And the tone controls for the treble can make it get really nuts. I wouldn't advise going over maybe ±1, because it can get really high, way louder than what it does for the bass actually. So be careful of that. And for the bass, I felt like it was about at the right place with the default settings. But you can play with the bass settings, because depending on where you have it in the room, it could sound better one way versus the other. So right now I'm about to do the directivity index measurements of the passive speaker. Doesn't matter if I use the active or passive one, because that's based on the physical properties of the speaker, not the tuning of the DSP. Alright, so this is the passive speaker. Ignore how crazy it is. But here is the sound power here in purple, and right here, what we can derive from that is the directivity index. And I was hoping this would be smoother because the cabinet is curved and the MTM is vertical this way, so that should help versus it being sideways. But yeah, it looks like right here there is some kind of something going on around 3 kilohertz, and you know, it wavers up here as well around, what is that, 8.5K, and again at 16K. So there's some ups and downs going on over here. What does that mean as far as listening? I don't know. I'm going to have to wait and see and listen. Okay, so it doesn't have a left-right toggle, so I'm going to have to manually move these. The one with the amplifier you want on the left-hand side. So first things I notice is that the imaging when you're right in between these is very good. Now, the other thing that I also noticed that is if you go up or down, you want to stay pretty much on axis to these. If you go up too high or down too low, not so good for the sound. Bass, I was expecting a little bit more just because of the 2 passive radiators on the side. I thought it was going to be extreme. Now I had it on the 0 setting, and I felt like I could hear more bass. Now you just heard that pop right there. Not sure what that was. Yeah. But I did have to turn up the bass a little bit, turn down the treble that 1 notch, and sounded pretty good to me. Overall, yeah, I think imaging was good. I just thought that it was going to give me a little bit more bass. But again, I'm in the middle of the room here. And if you have these near a wall, it might give you a totally different experience. So keep that in mind. So yeah, these are pretty forgiving horizontally. So I can toe these in, toe them out, and it does change up the sound. I can have a little bit more leeway if I point them straight out versus pointing them in towards me. But I do have a more precise image, more focused center image if I do angle them in. So it's a trade-off, and you got to figure out what works for you based on where you're at and how far the speakers are from your main listening position. There's that click again. Yeah, so there's a little bit of sound from the amplifiers. Not abnormal, but not the best that I've heard either. Let me see if changing to a different source changes the amount of noise that comes from the amplifiers. So this is USB mode right now. Let's see what happens if I go to optical. USB actually, I hear the most. Bluetooth seems to be the lowest. Yeah, that's interesting. Typically the analog input like RCA would give you the most noise, but in this case it's less than what I'm getting from the USB. So something to keep in mind. So let me play something off Epidemic Sound so you guys can hear maybe some kind of music. If you have a nice pair of headphones, something that maybe follows the Harman target curve, you'll get a pretty good experience. This one's called Below Freezing by Ayo. Alright, so that sounded pretty good with that particular track, so I guess it's track dependent. I'm going to have to play around and listen to a few more tracks on this and see. Maybe some tracks I'm more familiar with would be good, but let me just check out one more here. Hopefully this has some vocals on it. Caro by Lod Ito. Alright, so I think the secret to these is actually the imaging. That's the thing I was most impressed with. So far, I was actually thinking it's going to be the bass just because of the way it looks, but it's actually more the imaging. Very interesting. Let me play a few of my test tracks here. My love has come along. Alright, imaging. Very good. So I'm playing lossless on Qobuz. For little hours. Alright, so on that one, the sax, or I'm not sure exactly the instrument that was playing, it was like perfect. It was right here, and whatever was happening over here, the snares very far to the right, sounded awesome. So definitely imaging is the magic trick for these. Now back to the measurements that I did prior to listening. None of that even entered my head, to be honest. I had to look it up and see what the measurements looked like. What do I see as issues here? Like the scooped out mid-range and upper mid-range. Do I notice that here listening? No. I've listened to these tracks often, and I was just more overwhelmed with how enjoyable the imaging was. So yeah, possibly if I do an A/B test between maybe a more accurate speaker, I would be able to tell that the upper mid-range is maybe scooped out a little bit more V-shaped than I would prefer. But one thing that you cannot fix with speakers, the directivity, the imaging, and what they do physically. And I think because these are rounded, because it's an MTM design and I'm horizontally in the middle of both of them, because it's not having port chuffing issues, because there's no port, they're using passive radiators. All of these factors, and the fact that have these away from walls, so any wall here is pretty far. The closest wall is probably the ceiling or the floor. So because of those things, I'm getting excellent imaging and I'm not noticing these other issues. The one thing I can tell you though is I was expecting a little bit more bass just by the way they look. And I'm not getting that deep bass extension that I was kind of hoping for. So let me play a few more tracks where I know there's supposed to be some deep bass, and let me see if I can maybe enhance that using the bass here without making it too bloated. Alright, so I tried to bump up the bass and it didn't really do much to enhance the response. It made it a little bit too boomy and unnatural. So I think the secret to these is use them for their imaging, for any issues where it's not perfectly flat. If you wanted to use these for studio monitors, then you get something like a mini DSP 2x4 HD or a Flex like I have here, and calibrate it so that it is flat, which you can do because the directivity index shows that these are EQable, and then add a nice subwoofer. So Monolith actually has a pretty inexpensive 8-inch THX woofer that I have in my studio, and I think that would pair very nicely with these actually. So that can handle the low end, let these do what they do best, which is the imaging, and I think you're gonna have a pretty good system there. Alright, so I am testing the MTM-100s here in the living room space, and I'm actually surprised with the imaging still in this space. I was curious to see if the imaging would translate to this larger space, and it does. The bass actually sounds better here because I have them closer to walls, so I am getting some boundary gain. Let's see how low these hit. So I'm gonna use a spatial audio calibration toolkit to see what the F10 or minus 10 dB point is here in this room. So here with the tone defeat and with the bass turned up, they still only played down to about 50 hertz. Once it got down to the 40 hertz tone, couldn't really hear too much. So limit is about 50 hertz here in room. Let's see how it sounds from the kitchen. Good news is here in room, I am getting some boundary gain and the bass is satisfactory. Now, I still would recommend a sub with these just to get the most out of them, but they're getting down to about 50 hertz, and that's pretty reasonable for their size. And luckily, the imaging still is impressive. I'm not sure exactly if it has to do with the MTM design, or if it's that the treble is a little bit boosted and maybe that helps with the imaging. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but nonetheless, it still sounds very nice. It's pleasing. So overall, I can say that based on what I'm hearing here, these are some speakers that I would want to listen to music, and I would like to use these for content creation. I think they just sound pretty fun, and you can get them to sound pretty accurate. And so for their price, let me see what the price is right now. So current price is $449 for these. I'm gonna have to go ahead and put these on the speaker leaderboard and see where they place. Yeah, they're not the least expensive, they're not the most expensive, but yeah, they're up there. So here we are at the speaker leaderboard. I have the Monolith MTM-100 here. It does fit into this powered speaker section. Do I like it better than the 5s and the Kali Audio LP6? These are powered speakers for general use, not necessarily at a desktop, but more like a living room situation. What would I rather have here? The ELAC Nevis is much more expensive. The Klipsch, the 5s look very nice. The Kali Audio LP6 V2, these are all studio monitors, so they're more accurate. SyncCell Alpha is very expensive, but it has almost subwoofer qualities. I think it's going to be around here, around the Vanuatu Transparent 1 Encore. They both have lots of functionality. I would put it slightly below. The Dynas I like better just because I made them. They look cool, but the amplifier is a bit noisy on those. The ELAC Connects, those are pretty decent. I think these are all comparable right here. The other reason I'll put it above the Dynas is just because they have a remote and they have more functionality built in. For best powered speakers for the desktop, the studio monitors really win out just because they are made specifically for that situation. The Hercules monitor, So these are all very good for the desktop. These are pretty slim, so even though they look big, these are probably more suitable for a desk than some of the other ones here. I'm gonna go and put these, let's see, probably around here. I really like the imaging on these. I also think the base was about on par with these Hercules Monitor 5s. So under $500, what would I rather have? LP6 V2, the Encore B6 just has more bass. Overall, I think that this is a better, more well-rounded speaker. So is the Diamond 12.1, as are most of these here. So I'm gonna go ahead and put these here above the Dynas. I think this is pretty fair right here. Some of these are all very close. It's tough to compare all of these because some of these are passive, whereas these are active, and these have a lot more functionality built in. But just from a pure sound quality standpoint, some of these other ones here might even sound better. So last, we have best overall sound quality regardless of price. I think if you wanted more bass, you would go with the Dynas. If you want overall better tonality and a quieter amplifier, you're gonna go with a Monolith. So either way, the Alpha P5 is probably more linear, so you could make the case that should go on top. In most cases, I would probably prefer these. So there you have it. If you liked the video, make sure to like, subscribe, ring the bell to be notified when I upload new videos. That's it. Take care. Bye-bye.